Korie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Movie is The Blind. It comes out September the 28th at theblindmovie.com, and it's incredible. I watched it this weekend. I had tears at the end. Willie, you're the baby in the movie. What do you remember about that time with your dad?
I really don't have any memories. I guess I'll call it pre-Jesus for Phil and Kay. Even though I think I was a 2-year-old in the movie. It was actually played by my grandson, John Shepherd. So he was, that was his first acting gig, getting to play his grandpa. And so I didn't have a lot of lines, or I guess he didn't have a lot of lines in the movie. But yeah, it was kind of cool. But I really, my earliest memories were probably once the movie ends. That's probably when I started having memories. And so I could always sense it and feel that, that my parents had come out of some tragedy and damage for sure. But yeah, most of my memories, thank the Lord, are from, really the healing process and them doing really good and being great people.
At what point did you realize that your dad did have that past, though? Were you much older?
No, I wouldn't say much older. I mean, it was, I think like the movie, Phil and Kay are pretty much an open book about their life. So that was pretty much open information. I don't know how young I was, but I can remember they came through a lot. And
if Phil, he's pretty blunt, so he'll just tell you like it is. And so he's always done that. And I think also he's always used his story, his testimony to help other people. Right. If it can help someone else by him telling the hard parts of his life, he'll do it.
And that's probably where I heard it, was him sharing his faith with many other people, and then him referencing, his own life and his own struggles. And so, so we always knew that. That was always kind of a larger than life character anyway. So I would hear stories from other people just about a lot of the craziness and what all happened at that bar and, in their lives. So
the movie depicts your mom struggling just with life. She's not able to buy food. There's a scene in there where she's at church, and I don't know if you were in that scene or not. Your character, the young boy, but she has no money for Christmas presents, and they take money from the Christmas tree. They take presents from the Christmas tree. What do you remember about poverty during that time?
Now that I remember a lot of, and even though I don't remember not getting any presents, but certainly they were limited. Money was always an issue. We would, that's just kind of the way we had conversation, was that we don't have a lot of money, and so at the time, Dad was mostly fishing. The duck call was still like a dream, kind of getting off the ground, but most all our income came from really just fishing the river. So it was according to how the fish ran as to how much money we would have. So yeah, we didn't grow up with a lot for sure.
It's a very, very gritty movie. It goes places that a lot of faith films don't go, in terms of showing just how dark it was. Both of you, give me your thoughts on maybe who the target audience is and how you wanted to impact people.
Yeah, it's difficult because Duck Dynasty, our show, is, it's a funny family show. And so we're telling the backstory of it, and it is dark, it's gritty, it's hard, but, we just felt like it's important to be honest about that, because I think you can see a family on television and think, oh, this upward trajectory towards success and their life must have always been perfect. But actually that is really far from the case. There was alcoholism and addiction and adultery and all those things as part of their story. And we thought, you really need to see the dark side to understand the light, to understand God's grace and his redemption and his covering for even what someone would look at and be like the worst of sinners. And so it was important for us to actually accurately tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Willie? What do you think about that?
I think the same thing. I think, whatever it takes to get the gospel out, we're willing to do that or talk about that. And so, I think that, to think that we didn't come from a lot. That was so apparent to us of where we'd come out of, and then also with business and success, and just realized that none of those things were online. I mean, everything looked like it was going to be pretty desperate, and so the things, mom and dad did in business were extraordinary. And part of that was that story as well, and kind of where he got, that idea. And, he told me one time, he said, once I finally got sober, I could finally actually think about business. And so that was holding him back a lot. It was just from the lifestyle he was living. He just couldn't seem to focus. And he had all this talent, and he had he got his master's degree from Louisiana Tech. And they had come out of extreme poverty. When I talked about us being poor, but I mean, they were like poverty. And so it was almost like he had all this hope and expectation and had gotten out of the situation, looked like his life was going somewhere. And then there was just this tragedy of him just wasting it, just throwing it away. And so that, I think that comes across in the movie as well.
Was there sort of a generational, a breaking of some sort of generational, I'm not sure what the word is there, but of course the movie depicts his mother as struggling. Was it mental illness? Is that what she struggled with? And then, Mr. Phil's mother struggling with mental illness, and then his father, I believe, died an early death.
He didn't die an early death. He had broken his back. So my grandfather worked in the oil field, as most of the people around that area did, in Northwest Louisiana. So once he broke his back, that's when, really times got hard. And my grandmother did suffer with mental illness. However, I mean, the movie we could only show, we were showing parts of that, but she was actually a stable force in our lives. And so she would just kind of have these, we would call them spells, where she would just go off and have to get medicated and get back on the right track. And so, but she was kind of one of the stable forces in all of the families, especially when it was crazy. But I think it was generational, but it was also just the times. I mean, this is, you're talking about, Phil was born in the 40s, so you're just coming out of, the Depression, and, it was, generational, but also I think it was just hard times. It was hard times in that area, and especially there wasn't as much of a safety net, if someone, if you break your back. And, my grandfather had served in the Navy, and there just wasn't, when something happens to you, you're just looking at being very, very poor, and you just couldn't make ends meet. So
I was thinking there's also a phrase that's used a few times through the film, "Who's the man?" And that's something that
Who's a man?
Who's a man? Who's a man? Yeah.
I heard that a lot growing up.
And Willie remembers hearing that a lot growing up. And that was something that was kind of that pressure, that pressure that Phil felt from a very young age, and all of the kids, because their mom was in and out of mental hospitals. Their dad, had a broken back, wasn't able to work. So there's that pressure of like, who's the man, and like showing that you can prove you can do it all. And then when you hit rock bottom, you're like, oh, I can't do it all. I don't have it all together. And that's when Jesus comes in, and you're like, oh, I don't have to, because there's someone who has taken this for me. And that's really a big part of the theme and the message of the movie as well.
Let's talk about that theme briefly, because I was really impacted by how the movie ended, because it goes from the movie itself, and then all of a sudden you see your dad on screen, Willie, and he's talking kind of like in a white chair type of moment, talking to the screen. Why was it important to end like that with your dad in real life?
Yeah, that actually wasn't my decision. In fact, when I saw the movie, I didn't realize they'd put that on there. Well, I was so glad they did. So was that your call or somebody else?
Actually, Jase, I think, is the one who thought of it. When we showed Jase the first time the film, he was like, I think it'd be cool if you actually saw Phil at the end. We had planned on putting some kind of like older clips of him, but to see him at 77 years old, have lived the life and let him tell it from his own voice. Yeah. I thought, it turned out really, really.
But I did think that was a great part to see where Phil had come out of. Now, if you know of Duck Dynasty, you know about the show, the success, so you kind of know where it all ends up, as you're watching the movie, if you know our story. But just to have him kind of the way he sees it, and the how important faith is and became in his life, it wasn't obviously up until 28 years old, and then but from for the next 50 years. It just literally the number one thing in his life, and what he wanted just to share passionately, no matter what, no matter whether it hurt the business. And this is a guy who was, when he started doing like duck call demonstrations, he had a friend say, Phil, you can't talk about your faith. You're going to have to separate that from your business. It's going to kill your business. And Phil said, well, I live such a bad life. I just feel like I have to talk about this, and no matter what happens. And obviously it worked out well that he kept talking about his faith, because business thrived as well. And so, but just seeing him and how passionate he was at the older stage of life was important.
Amen to that. And of course, your Uncle Si is depicted in the film as well. There's a few funny moments of that people can kind of see the parallel and the show as well. And there's also this large table moment at the end where all the characters are at a table. Was that kind of a parallel to the Duck Dynasty as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because this movie is so different than Duck Dynasty, but we wanted people to kind of feel that moment there at the end. And the dinner table which is why we had it on Duck Dynasty as well. It's such a critical piece of the Robertson family and their story, and like we love to sit around a dinner table, and we think the family dinner table is so important. So yeah, that was a little nod to that, and I think it turned out really neat. I cry on that part every time. I don't know why. It's like something about that makes me emotional. It's like this, you see this family has been through this tough time, and then all of a sudden they're able to like enjoy one another and enjoy a meal together. That makes me emotional every time I see it.
Yeah, I think the dinner table is it was important on Duck Dynasty, but even more so, I think, on this movie. One, because that spot at the end of the table where Phil's at on the movie, and also in Duck Dynasty where he takes that spot on the table, you got to realize it wasn't too far back where he wasn't in that spot. He wasn't sitting there. And so that dinner table was just us and Mom, and really looked like a visual of how our life was going to be. So there was such an appreciation just to have the family. But even growing up, and I think because it was a different time, because during that time we hardly ever ate out. There was no drive-through. That was a special time, and that was where we kind of had that time every evening. We would sit there and eat dinner. We would tell stories and share stories, and so it was so impactful for me. As life is now, it's hard to we have to be really intentional about just having that one time where we're all together, maybe in a week. And so for us, it was just every day. And my grandparents were there. It was everybody who kind of lived around us were there. There was always a couple of spots too for whoever else was there, whoever we're sharing their faith with, or friends or something. So that was important. And to me, when I see it on the movie, it's like the beginning version of what you end up seeing on Duck Dynasty.
And the fun part is you see the legacy. So we included, Jeff then is born by the time you see that part of the film. So he's there depicted by one of his sons, actually. And, Si's wife is now in the picture, and the different Jan, Phil's sister, her husband's in the picture. So it just shows that legacy.
Jan's son.
Plays.
Yeah, he's in that as well. So there was some insight for us, like going, that's
that generational legacy that is impacted whenever you change your life. Whenever a family sticks together, a family turns to Jesus, there's a generational impact. It doesn't just impact you. And so that also kind of depicted that in the film.
It's a powerful film, and I encourage people to go see it. It's The Blind. It comes out September the 28th, and folks can learn more information at theblindmovie.com. Willie and Korie, thanks so much.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.